Hello, this is your State Senator Len Suzio speaking to you from the Capitol. This is a part of a continuing series of videos that we're doing about events and issues going on in the district and in the Capitol. And today I'm pleased to have with me a very special guest, someone that I have known for many, many years and have the greatest respect for, one of my colleagues in the State Senate, Senator Joe Markley. Joe, welcome to the show today.
Pleasure to be with you, Len.
It's great to have you. This is like, wow, this is the best, because I can't say enough good things about you, Joe. I really respect you, and I like you as a friend and as a colleague as well.
Well, I'm on record on how I feel about you, and I feel like one advantage of doing the show with you is it's like we get to sit and talk for half an hour anyway.
Yeah,
so
which we can't ever do anymore.
Exactly.
Well, look, let's get into, I've always said one of the goals of that I have personally is to make my constituents the best informed in the state of Connecticut. I like to talk about issues in depth with them. So there's a couple of issues you and I want to talk about today. The overriding issue, the big hot button issue today is the tolls, or the potential for tolls in Connecticut. So I want to talk about that to begin with, and then we'll move on to some other issues as well. So let's begin again by talking about tolls. And the first thing I want to get into is, do we actually need tolls? And then we'll get into, well, if we do tolls, what might they look like? So let's talk about, do we need tolls, Joe? What do you say?
Well, so we always get told we must have this new revenue source. It's like saying, did we need an income tax in 1991? We were told over and over again we had to have an income tax. But really, that was a moment when we had to decide whether we wanted to continue to increase state spending or get our spending under control and keep taxes the same. We got the same situation with the tolls. The state takes in enough revenue already, one way or another. Some of it from transportation charges like the gas tax, and some of it in other ways to deal with our needs. Going to another revenue source is just a way of permitting us to not husband our resources properly. And what I've been finding over the last few months, a lot of people would say, oh yeah, I think tolls would be good. The more they're learning about them, including some people that have been very, very strong supporters of tolls, they're starting to realize that it's a bad idea, and that the money is going to come out of our pockets. There's no easy way to raise revenues with tolls just on other people.
Right, right. Well, let's talk again, before we get into how tolls might be implemented, assuming the Democrats have their way. There's two arguments they put forward. They say that the Special Transportation Fund is going to go in the red in the near future, in the next year or two. And there are several factors driving that. One is which is the gas tax collections. Do you want to elaborate about that? Or
Hey, the truth is this. One of the things they've been pushing is we need tolls because cars have better gas mileage, and all these electric cars, we're not collecting the gas tax. The truth is, and you know it better than I do, the gas tax revenues have been going up year after year. And the percentage of electric cars on the road is negligible. And the gas mileage, increase in gas mileage is a good thing, but there's still more cars, more people driving more miles, so the revenues are still there. Where they're going to be in 20 years or 40 years, who can say, but we can deal with it then. We don't have any necessity to make a change now. The main reason the Special Transportation Fund is in trouble is because we've been sweeping it. The state goes in and takes the money out of it to cover shortfalls in the general fund and ends up being used for other purposes. If we dedicated the money that was supposed to go to transportation for transportation over all these years, we'd be all right. And if we started doing it on an ongoing basis and maybe did some bonding, as Republicans have suggested, for highway construction, which I think if there's any good use for bonding, that's it. When you're talking about building bridges, things that are going to be there for a long time, we could do all this without tolls, no question.
So let's say, first of all, then, the gas tax collections are not going down. They're going up, like you said, Joe. And in fact, interestingly enough, I know from 2013 through 2017, they were up about 65 million gallons per year of consumption. But just for the heck of it, I checked this morning to see where things are going, and the Department of Revenue Services hadn't posted any of the gas consumption figures as of last October. So I talked to them. By the way, when we talk about 2013 to 2017, we're talking about fiscal year, so it's June 30th. So the last numbers they had on their website was October of 2017. So I called the department today and said, gee, usually you're a month or two behind. We're 5 months ago now. Where are the numbers? And they said, oh, we overlooked that. We'll post them now. And so I looked about an hour ago or so, and this year's consumption's up about 6 million gallons compared to last year. So now we're talking 6 million more gallons per year on top of the 65 million. We're pushing 70 plus million more gallons every year being consumed in Connecticut. So that first argument that the transportation fund's going to go in the red because of declining tax revenues is patently false. And you can look at the DRS, the Department of Revenue Services website to prove it. But the other thing that blows my mind, Joe, is I sit on the Transportation Committee. The other thing that's definitely affecting it is this plan that the governor's put forward. And I use the term plan loosely, kind of in quotes. He put forward a $100 billion transportation plan back a year or two ago. And that is a big factor in what's driving this negative cash flow for the transportation fund. Because when he came into office back in 2011, we were spending barely about $1 billion a year on transportation. And if you take $100 billion over 30 years, that's what? $3.3 billion a year. So it's 330% of what we were spending when he came in. And he's saying we're going to spend that much more to make up for lost time. But he's not saying it's going to take us 5, 6, or 7 years. He's saying 30 years. That's, to me, the unquestioned fact, and I use that term loosely, that remains unquestioned by the legislature. I sit on the Transportation Committee, and I'm shocked that there's been no debate or discussion about that. It's just taken as a given fact. And if you take that as a given fact, sure, the numbers look darn scary. But the question is, how realistic are they? I don't think it's even possible to spend at that rate. We don't have the manpower and the resources to spend at that rate. So as long as we continue spending it, if we're predicating our need for tolls on that, it's pretty shaky grounds, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and of course and when you say, I'm going to start spending enormous amount of money on a certain things, the cost of it goes up because you're getting, let's say the marginal availability of the work and so forth is tougher to get. When companies are hungry, they're going to be working cheap. When they know that the government is going to be pouring billions into something year after year after year, it's going to get more and more expensive. And also, it's nonsense for the governor to say, here's my 30-year plan. I've got 7 months left in office, but here's the 30-year plan for the state of Connecticut's transportation funding. Every governor is going to come in and come up with his own plan. We absolutely have needs. One of the things we have to do is start to prioritize between our needs and our wants, and I might even say, and our pipe dreams. We are spending money on things like the New Britain-Hartford busway, which costs $600 million, but is still costing us $20 million a year, which comes out of transportation funds. Subsidizing things like the Shoreline East train service. You know that subsidy is $80 per ride on that line. Now, I mean, I love the idea that you could take a train from New Haven out to Old Saybrook or whatever, but we can't afford that. That's simply not that's not a sustainable subsidy. And things like the high-speed rail line up to Springfield. I mean, that seems now to be a done deal, but I've spoken against it since before I was elected. It simply isn't a priority. The priority is the Mixmaster in Waterbury, the viaducts in Hartford that have to be replaced. We know that. The first thing we should do is take care of what we've got. And Malloy refuses to do that. He keeps finding new places he says we have desperate need, and then he finds new places to spend money. We need to spend the money first on the things we have that need to be subsidized. And I'll say one last one. The train service on the shoreline from New Haven into New York City is the greatest commuter rail system in the country. We should put everything into that. If we made that as good a system as we could, it would take a lot of the pressure off of 95. That's a place where the money makes sense. Those are the places we should be spending the money, not on new projects like high-speed rail to Springfield.
By the way, one thing I find interesting about the high-speed rail to where? To Springfield? What's going to be in Springfield in another year?
Casino.
We're actually going to be paying for a high-speed train line for Connecticut taxpayers to go to Springfield and spend their money in a Massachusetts casino that's going to get us no good. In the meantime, we're going to be hurting our own casinos. It just sounds to me like it's a pretty backwards way of doing things, and it's actually it's like shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yes, I agree with you. And of course, the sad thing is Springfield's a great city, second largest city in New England. But there hasn't been a lot of reason to go there. I used to joke about who's in such a hurry to get to Springfield. Now we're going to have, let's call it a bad reason to go to Springfield versus no reason. Anyways, let's fix what we have and not look for new places to spend money.
Well, let's just continue on with tolls a little bit longer because, again, I want my constituents and yours to be as educated as possible about it. So let's just say that we lose the fight, just for argument's sake, and tolls are going to be implemented in Connecticut. Let's talk about what it might look like. Now, I read a report from CDM Smith Associates. They're the consulting firm that the DOT has hired, and they produced numerous studies of various tolling scenarios in Connecticut. One of them shocked me the other day because we've all been talking about 70 or 80 of these gantries and the particular study I saw, which was published in April of 2015, so only 3 years ago, it forecasted or used 121 locations on every single limited access highway in Connecticut. And that's just the interstates, but the limited access highways like Route 2, Route 9, Route 8, etc. So it's going to be ubiquitous. The tolls will be everywhere. And that's the scenario, by the way, on which they're relying to get the most money, of course. The more tolls there are, the more places there are, the more money is going to come in. But what worries me, Joe, and I'd like to get your comment about it, is it's not just the interstates, it's the limited access highways transporting Connecticut citizens from one place to the other. So what are the implications, in your opinion, in terms of who's paying for these tolls?
Well, this is one of the reasons I said at the beginning, a lot of people who like the idea of tolls are now coming around. One reason is this notion that if we put up tolls, we can stick it to out-of-state drivers. We'll put them on the borders. Well, the federal government won't let us put them on the borders. The other thing to keep in mind is we get over $200 million a year from the federal government since we took the tolls down. That we get essentially free of charge for transportation needs. And the truckers, who are also often demonized on this, pay us over $40 million a year because there's a mileage charge for interstate trucking companies. So when if the tolls come back, every resident of Meriden or Southington is going to be paying them, and we will be the primary payers. That same report said the maximum number of people on the interstate from out of state at any given moment is 25%. That's on the interstates, on 95 or 84. If you're talking about 691, for instance, I drive on 691 to go see you, right? But an interstate traveler isn't going on 691 or on 9. You'd be down to a very small percentage. Yet the tolls are going to go there as well. And the other thing that report talks about is how high the toll is going to be. They model the tolling at 10 cents a mile or 20 cents a mile. Those are the two numbers that they use in that report. Remember that the national average is 4 cents a mile. That's what Massachusetts charges if you take the Massachusetts Turnpike. If we charge 20 cents a mile, my commute, 19 miles from Southington to Hartford, if I had to do that 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, I'd be paying about $2,000 a year in tolls. And this proposal doesn't have an offsetting reduction in the gas tax. As a matter of fact, the governor's proposal would put the tolls on and increase the gas tax, and then put a tax on your tires on top of it. And maybe the worst part of all this is congestion tolling. This is one of the things, in order to continue to receive that federal funding, we might have to do something like congestion tolling, which says tolls will be higher when the roads are the most crowded. What does that mean? When are the roads the most crowded? Well, what do we say? 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6 in the afternoon, when people have to commute. Most of the people who have to commute don't have any choice about it. You can't go to your boss and say, the tolls are too high, I'm going to be coming in at 10 o'clock. And interestingly, the congestion tolling is the least likely to hit the out-of-state travelers, who either don't necessarily travel during those hours anyways, or don't have to. If you say, okay, I'm going to go to Boston, but I can either leave a little early or leave a little late and miss the prime time on the tolling. Think about the idea that if the toll is 20 cents a mile and the congestion tolling, as was suggested, is a 40% premium over that, suddenly your toll is almost 30 cents a mile, and your commute back and forth to Hartford during rush hour is almost $3,000 a year to go from Southington to Hartford. I tell people again, you might have in your mind a vision of a toll that you wouldn't have to pay. That's not the toll you're going to get. So be against it. Hey, the other thing I'll say before you even can ask me about it, and now I'm going off on a rant. Well, one of the things, another insidious aspect of this whole proposal is the idea of setting up a transportation authority and saying, well, we're not going to pass a tolling plan, but we're going to set up an authority and give them the power to put the tolls into place. And then when it goes into place, the legislators that voted for tolls can say, I didn't vote for that. That wasn't my idea. I wanted the tolls on the border like you did. So that is an abnegation of our responsibility as legislators to make a decision. And one of the things about this is that if there's a vote on tolls, it's going to be a vote on, shall we have tolls? It's not going to be a vote on any particular proposal. So assume that it's the worst proposal you can dream up and vote no. That would be my advice.
And I'm going to give you another thing that I would say make your hair turn gray, but I don't know if
there's not enough left for that. Yeah.
Make your beard turn more gray. And I found out as I was reading through the CDM Smith recommendations, the consultant's recommendations to the DOT about tolls, basically they said the toll rates we're talking about are if you have a transponder in your car and it's bouncing off a signal. If you do not have a transponder in your car, they're saying the toll rate should be 50% higher than if you have. So think about that now.
Yeah.
Talk about adding insult to injury. Not only will Connecticut citizens be paying a premium for commuting to work, and they have no choice. They have to go to work at the hour that's going to be the congestion hour, so they're paying a premium already. But if they don't get a transponder and put it in their car, then they're going to be paying another 50% on top of that, Joe. I mean, talk about putting somebody in behind the eight ball.
And you know, this also comes around to another part of the myth of the out-of-staters. If you're the fellow from Mississippi that decides he's going to go up and see New England for once in his life, and drives all the way across Connecticut and all the way back across Connecticut, he's going to go home and get a bill for maybe $50. What's the chances he's going to pay that bill? He says, I took my one trip to Connecticut. We're going to spend money. We're going to have a whole bureaucracy set up to try to collect money from people out of state who owe small amounts. By the time you get the money, we'll spend more to collect it. And there's the cost of setting these gantries up, which I saw one estimate of about $350 million.
Double that. It's $635 million is the number in the CDM Smith report. If you do the 121 gantries that they were talking about,
and assuming that they come in at cost and everything else. Again, I'd say, and they're talking about an additional revenue of $800 or $900 million. Again, remember we're getting $250 million right now without a dime of it coming out of our pockets as normal Connecticut drivers. Is it worth incurring all that expense and paying all that money to boost that from $250 million to $800 million? I don't think it's even near makes sense.
Yeah, actually, the federal government is giving us an annual subsidy right now, $700 million because we took the tolls down. And the only way we could put tolls on the road is like the congestion pricing configuration that you're talking about. We dare not jeopardize that $700 million, or we'll really be behind the eight ball. So tolls aren't the panacea that people predict it's going to be. We're not going to get this huge windfall from out-of-staters. We are going to incur $650 million or more of installation costs. And by the way, those are 2014 dollars. So by the time they do this, and that's another interesting thing in the consultant's report. The consultant's report is that if it's fast-tracked, we might get the tolls all up and installed and operational in about 4 to 4.5 years. So we're years away from it happening too. And think about this. Let's just say that this pie in the sky, $100 billion plan of government voice is truly pie in the sky, and that we do have to spend a lot of extra money for maybe 6, 7, or 8 years to catch up with all the neglect that's going on, especially during his administration. But so what happens at that point in time? Why would we go and spend 630 or 40 or 50 million or more dollars just for something we're going to need for 7 or 8 years, and then when things become normal again, we won't need the tolls? But you and I both know once they're up, they're there permanently, aren't they? They're going to be there forever.
Of course. And once the government gets the revenue, it never wants to let the revenue go. They'll always find a need for it. If the economy comes back, I ran for office way back in '84 when we had big surpluses. And at that point, the Republicans were running on, we need to cut taxes immediately. And the Democrats, despite the huge surpluses, were saying, well, I don't know if we really want to cut taxes. There's all these unmet needs. The politicians will always find a way to spend money. And the way to stop that is don't put it in their hands.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another favorite topic of how they spend money up here. Let's talk about Hartford and the bailout, Joe. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was a terrible decision, and apparently, to some extent, it was there was a certain amount of subterfuge. This was something that was included in the bipartisan budget that was passed last fall. Bipartisan in that in the Senate there were only 3 votes against it, and 2 of them were
Right
for
here.
you and me. And the other vote was for the Liberal Democrat, Gary Winfield. And I was always concerned that there would be a bargain like that which would involve tax increases, and that's what happened in this case. What I don't think people realized is it also involved not simply a guarantee of Hartford's debt, basically co-signing a note, but as it was interpreted, an assumption of Hartford's debt to a tune of $550 million. And in fact, by the time the debt is paid, it's more like 750 or 800 million because we're paying the interest on the debt in the meantime. And of course, this has caused consternation from conservatives who are upset simply at, yet again, Malloy committing the state future administrations to spending, just like the CBAC agreement. But it's also caused problems on the Democratic side because, of course, the very next morning, the mayor of New Haven and the mayor of Bridgeport were up here with their hands out saying, where's my debt assumption? And of course, it angers well-run communities that say, we've been responsible, we pay our debt. And what do we get? We have the governor taking the rest of our funding away from us. It was a terrible decision. I would like to see it simply and completely repudiated. I'm assured that some kind of deal is going to be made in a bipartisan fashion which will guarantee that Hartford has to pay the money out. That's kind of in the category of I'll believe it when I see it. I've known Hartford as you did when it was still a vital city. I want to see it be that again. It's the capital. I spend a lot of time here. I walk around this city and I still see its potential. But just throwing money at it isn't the answer. And we've been doing that for years and years, and a lot of what we've done is worse than useless. Part of that is the XL Center. To go on to another Hartford topic, the governor came out and said, we want to put $250 million into renovating the XL Center. Again, in a sneaky way, however, we've been doing it piecemeal. 35 million, and then 100 million. And the awful thing about this is it makes it more comfortable for people. But once we get half the money into it, they're going to say, well, you can't, you've already spent 135 million. Why are you not, you got to finish the job now. This has to end. The Civic Center, I think, was a mistake from the beginning. We took what had been 4 urban blocks. They may not have been the most prosperous blocks in the city, but they were right downtown. Mixed use, retail, office space, residential, busy day and night. Flattened them and turned it into one mammoth, monolithic structure. And the excuse was, well, we're going to have a shopping mall inside of it. The shopping mall failed. It's long gone. Now it's a dead zone all day long. And in my opinion, it's worse than useless. And the sooner we recognize it, the better. It's my understanding we forced them to make it available to private parties for investment. And it's my understanding just in the last day or two that potential private buyer has come forward and said, we'll pay you $50 million supposedly, and we'll put the $250 million in. And for some reason, the state oversight board, the folks who control it, are hemming and hawing about it. I would be down there saying, what do we have to do to make this deal work? Because what we're doing now is not working.
Maybe it's their own self-interest. They don't want to lose their jobs.
Well, Len, it's not, I wouldn't even blame them if it is. But if you've been running something for years and it's a big part of your job and you feel like you know how to do it and all of that, it's hard all of a sudden to say, no, we're just we're going to be done with that and somebody else is going to do it. But leadership should step in and say, no, that's what needs to happen.
Joe, Connecticut's a catastrophic mess at this point in time, financially speaking. We've got all these wonderful advantages that are still there nonetheless.
That's right.
The location of the state is fabulous, and there's just so many attractive things about it. But how do we get out of the mess we're in? What are your thoughts about that?
Bad public policy created the mess. We grew up in a state that was the most prosperous state in the nation. And my father was a small businessman. That's why I'm in politics. And he was so frustrated with what he saw happening in taxes and regulation that were making this state less competitive. And he said, this sooner or later they're going to kill it. And we have killed it. All I can say is the way to correct for bad public policy is through good public policy. We have to reverse the things we've been doing. We've got to get our fiscal house in order so we have enough stability that people aren't waiting for the other shoe to drop as they are now. And this is one of the reasons these businesses are leaving. As bad as it is now, they see worse coming. If they knew that it wasn't going to get any worse, they wouldn't be panicked. Then we need to start to reverse these things. We need to start to cut taxes in a way that encourages business and wealth to stay in the state. To make the corporate, at least to send a signal to businesses that we prize having them there. And on the regulatory side and on the administrative side, we have to stop trying to be the first in the country on every kind of burden that can be put on business. The Democrats in this state are proud to say the first, the highest minimum wage, the first to have paid sick leave. We've got to get away from that. We've got to give businesses a break and a little breathing room. And if we do, I sometimes say it's like a plant. You go away on vacation and you don't water your plant and it comes back and it looks all dead, but you pour a little water on it. And it's amazing how much life there is. I'm convinced that Connecticut still has that life if we give it a break.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Joe. I think it's a question of leadership.
That's right.
And having the right ideas in the right direction. And of course, the governor will no longer be here next year. We don't know who's going to replace him yet, but it's a great opportunity for whoever does to turn the ship of state around. And I just want to say that I thoroughly enjoy serving the legislature with you and my colleagues, but you in particular. The two of us we're different in so many ways, but we're very much alike in other ways. And I just want to say that one reason why I have enjoyed running for the Senate and being in the Senate is because of you, Joe, and I love serving with you. And
well, I missed you those 2 terms you were gone. Very glad to have you back.
Well, I am back, and it's a pleasure to be with you. We've got now 3 weeks to go. We'll see what happens in these next 3 weeks, but at least I feel we've educated our audience today a little bit about some of the important issues, particularly tolls. So I just want to say thank you for joining us today for this show. I hope that you've learned something from it and you've got to know my colleague, Senator Markley, a little bit better and see why I like him so much. This is, again, your State Senator Len Suzio speaking to you from the Capitol. Thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to contact my office about any topics we discussed today. I'd be happy to respond. And thank you for the honor of representing you in Hartford. Have a great day.